Learning Module 2 will cover the art of storytelling, and in this specific video we're going to talk about the development of storytelling. Storytellers are a unique lot. Before the means to produce and distribute written stories in large quantities was developed, story was passed down orally and visually, and included some famous ancient tales that are still being told in very similar ways. Greek thespians, tribal and spiritual leaders, painters, sculptors, and musicians have all helped to develop an aesthetic of storytelling that involves physical proximity to the storyteller and his work in order to fully appreciate seeing and hearing the unfolding narrative. Even though the traditional meaning of visual storytelling has been with us since the first man figured, hey, I could create a stencil by blowing paint on my hand held to the wall to express how my day went, there is still some ambiguity revolving around its meaning. It is in our nature to tell stories and inform others of our life events. Storytelling, whether factual or fictional, is an intrinsic human characteristic. However, the way we communicate with others has changed drastically over time. Storytelling originated with visual stories, such as cave drawings, and then shifted to oral traditions in which stories were passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. There was then a shift to words formed into narratives, including written, printed, and typed stories. It is estimated that the Chevat Cave in France has drawings that date back 30,000 years. These drawings detail animals such as deer and bison, as well as themes of survival according to the Nature Index. It has been shown that humans in all societies, even dating back to cavemen, have an inclination towards visual representation. The Chevat Cave drawings were not just casual doodles, but rather art that displayed the talents of skilled craftsmen at the time. They reflected a universal language by which all could understand and appreciate the stories told with a stick and mud or clay. Another common form of drawing used to communicate stories is the use of hieroglyphics in ancient Egypt. This form of writing utilized pictograph characters as symbols and sounds. The hieroglyphic language dates back to about 5,000 years and is recognized as one of the world's earliest writing systems. It was not only used for religious documents, but also to line tombs and temples with messages to future inhabitants. Since we are visual individuals, drawings have always been an effective way to tell other stories about survival and life. Storytelling through oral tradition dates back to different points in history, depending on the culture. These traditions use song, chant, and epic poetry to tell stories that have been handed down from generation to generation, and eventually written and published. Myths were also first passed on through word of mouth. For example, oral myths in the United States are most common among Native American cultures. The Cherokee tribe continues to recount their creation story, although it's sometimes skewed depending on the person telling it. Traditional storytelling by word of mouth still takes place whenever a group of people get together to socialize, and it has helped to shape current studies in the field of communications. More specifically, myths are defined as the sacred stories supporting a religion. They often explain the present order of things and the creation of divinities. In the United States, oral myths, as opposed to the literary mythology of the Bible, are found primarily among Native Americans. The Cherokees who once inhabited North Georgia maintain a living tradition of oral myths in western North Carolina. A good example of the creation story told by Lord Arneach, a Cherokee storyteller. A variation on the universal flood myth, it attributes the formation of the Cherokees' mountainous homeland to a primeval buzzard that flapped its wings in the mud as he searched for dry land. Such myths have rarely figured in the Georgia storyteller repertoire since the Native American population was forcibly removed in the early 19th century. There is evidence of written symbols that date back to about 9,000 years ago. The first written stories were manually transcribed, whether on paper, stone, or clay. Writing began as drawings, but over time changed into script. The current alphabets were derived from older forms of writing, such as the Phoenician alphabet. The transcription from oral to written culture overlapped but is predominantly accounted for in ancient Greece, where the earliest inscriptions date from 770 to 750 BC. Scholars suggested that the Iliad by Homer is the oldest surviving work in the Greek language that originated from oral tradition, according to History of Information. Unfortunately, not all populations were literate, so only the educated class was able to read and write stories. This era also brought about the use of plays to tell stories. The next generation milestone in communications history is the introduction of mass printing that would make news and other information more readily available to all. Printing helped increase literacy among lay people. Johannes Gutenberg is considered the inventor of the printing press in the 15th century. However, 600 years before Gutenberg, Chinese monks created a block printing mechanism that set ink to paper using wooden blocks. As it is always done, storytelling involves a level of training and insight. Just as ancient shamans painted spiritual experiences on tall limestone walls in the desert heat to convey and record story for their culture and social structure, contemporary storytellers are responsible for constructing the reality, and sometimes the non-reality, that we find in our newspapers, on our televisions, in our books, through our radios, on our computer screens, and around our dinner tables. However, the list of storytellers does not stop with those who are formally trained in related craft. Each one of us participates at some point in the practice of gaining someone's attention with our abilities to spin a yarn or capture the beauty of a landscape with a stroke of charcoal pencil or our digital camera. If story is all around us, permeating much of the information we bring in during the day, then it stands to reason that all of us are in some part storytellers. Next, we'll cover storytelling as a tool.